I grew up in a house where sound felt like a sin. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath, afraid to echo the wrong tone. My father's voice ruled everything, not through shouting, but through silence so heavy it could make the air in the room shrink. We lived in a modest two-story home, all warm wood and cool shadows, the kind of place that looked peaceful from the outside, but felt like a held breath inside. He had rules for everything: how to sit, how to speak, even how to close a door. A door slammed too quickly could ruin an evening. A chair dragged too loud could summon his stare, the one that froze your throat before you even said sorry. Mother used to hum softly while washing dishes, but one day he asked her to stop. "It distracts the boy," he said. I must have been 6 then. From that day on, even the hums died, like someone turned off the last bit of warmth left in the house. I tried to follow every rule. I memorized them like prayers. Don't interrupt. Don't fidget. Don't ask twice. He said it was discipline, that it would make me a man who doesn't need comfort. But the truth was simpler. I was a boy afraid to breathe wrong. Dinner was the quietest time. The sound of silverware scraping against plates was the only conversation we had. I'd steal glances at my father's face, studying every movement, trying to guess if I was safe. Sometimes he would nod at my plate and say, "Eat more." Other times, the same gesture meant you've had enough. It was never about food, it was about obedience, a kind of silent choreography I was supposed to understand without question. At school, my teachers said I was well-behaved, mature, disciplined. They didn't see that I was just rehearsing survival. Every time someone raised their voice in class, my chest tightened. I waited for that familiar silence after the storm, the kind that came before punishment at home. But here, no one came for me. I almost missed the order of fear. When I was 9, I broke a mug. It wasn't even his favorite one, just a plain brown cup that slipped through my fingers. The crash felt louder than thunder. He came into the kitchen without saying a word, just looked at the pieces scattered across the floor. His face didn't change. No anger, no shout, just a stillness that made me want to disappear. He handed me a broom. "Clean it. Don't cry over it." I didn't. Not then, but I remember that night, lying in bed, eyes open in the dark, the sound of that shattering cup playing again and again in my head. It wasn't the noise that haunted me, it was how quiet he stayed. Silence became a language between us. He spoke it fluently. I learned it painfully. By the time I turned 12, I'd started hearing the rules even when he wasn't around. My body moved by habit, standing straight, speaking softly, folding my hands the right way. I thought that was how love worked, that maybe his strictness was his version of care, that he needed me to be perfect to be proud. But I was wrong, and it would take one small rebellion years later to understand what that silence really cost me.
By 13, I had learned how to live like a shadow. My footsteps made no sound on the wooden floors, my words never rose above a murmur, and my thoughts stayed hidden where they couldn't be found. I existed quietly, efficient, obedient, invisible. Father said silence built strength. He believed emotions were like loose wires, dangerous if left exposed. "Control yourself and the world can't hurt you," he'd say. I used to repeat those words under my breath, thinking they were truth. But the older I grew, the more they started to sound like a warning. Not about the world, but about him. The house had grown colder over the years, though nothing had really changed. The same clock ticked on the living room wall, the same curtains filtered the same dull light, and yet everything inside felt drained. Even Mother had become part of the silence, moving softly, speaking less, always watching his mood before she breathed too freely. She'd whisper sometimes when he was away. "He wasn't always like this." I'd ask her what she meant, but she'd only shake her head and say, "Just do as he says." That phrase, "do as he says," became the family's quiet anthem. One evening, I came home late from school. The bus had broken down, but explanations didn't matter in our house. When I stepped inside, the lights were dim, dinner cold. Father sat in his chair, his expression unreadable. Where were you? Bus broke, sir. You should have walked. It's 5 miles. 5 miles builds character. He stood, walked to the wall, and pointed to the clock. Discipline doesn't depend on chance. You plan for everything. Then came the silence, the long, heavy kind, that meant he was deciding how to make me remember. I didn't cry. I stood still, like a soldier waiting for orders. That's what he wanted, to see me take punishment without trembling. It wasn't about pain, it was about control. Afterwards, I sat in my room staring at my hands, trying to convince myself it had been my fault. That's how it always went. Guilt turned inward until obedience felt like safety again. At school, my friends laughed freely, made noise without fear. I admired it, even envied it. When they fought with their fathers, they shouted. I couldn't imagine that. A raised voice at home was unthinkable. But slowly, something inside me started to shift. It wasn't rebellion yet, just a quiet ache that made me wonder if life could be different. One afternoon during art class, our teacher told us to paint freedom. I froze. I didn't know what it looked like. Others painted birds, oceans, skies. I painted a locked door. The teacher stopped behind me, studied it for a while, and said, "That's not freedom, that's fear." I remember going home that day and looking at my father's study, the one room I wasn't allowed to enter. The door was closed, as always. My painting flashed in my head. Maybe that was it. My freedom, sealed behind his rules. When I turned 15, I began to write secretly. Small things at first. Thoughts, memories, questions I couldn't ask out loud. I hid the notebook under my mattress, terrified he'd find it. Writing was the only place I could speak. One night, I forgot to hide it properly. He found it. He didn't say a word at dinner, but the silence that night felt sharper, colder. Later, he came into my room holding the notebook. What is this? It's just writing. He flipped through it, reading lines aloud, words about loneliness, fear, longing. You think I'm cruel? He asked. I couldn't answer. His face stayed calm, but his voice dropped to a whisper. You don't understand yet. I'm making you strong. Then he tore the notebook in half. I didn't move. I didn't speak. But something inside me broke, quietly, invisibly, like a string pulled too tight, finally snapping. That night, I lay awake, the sound of paper tearing still echoing in my mind. I realized that his version of strength required killing something inside me. The part that felt, dreamed, and asked why. It was then I understood. Obedience wasn't love. It was a transaction. Silence in exchange for safety. But what happens when silence becomes unbearable? When the only thing left to protect is the voice you've buried for years? That answer would come soon, the day I finally said no.
It started with something small. It always does. I was 16 that winter, old enough to know fear by its weight, but still too young to understand the full shape of courage. The air in the house was colder that year, though the furnace still worked fine. It wasn't temperature. It was tension. The quiet kind that lives in walls and watches you breathe. Father had begun coming home later, his silence heavier. Mother seemed to shrink a little more every day, her smile like a ghost that no longer believed in itself. I remember her eyes, always darting, always checking. I think she knew something in me was changing, even before I did. It happened on a Sunday morning. He asked me to polish his shoes, a ritual we'd done since I was 8. But that day, I hesitated. I don't know why. My hand froze halfway to the brush, and in that small hesitation, something cracked open. He looked up from his newspaper. What are you waiting for? My voice barely made it past my throat. I have homework to finish. The silence that followed was absolute. He lowered the paper slowly, folded it with the precision of a man folding his anger. What? Did you say? I'll do it later.
It wasn't defiance, not really. It was a whisper of self, trembling and unsure. But in our house, hesitation was rebellion. He stood calm as ever. Come here. Every instinct screamed to obey. Every muscle remembered what came next. But something inside me, that quiet, bruised place I'd hidden for years, said no. I didn't move. His voice grew colder. Daniel, don't make this worse for yourself. That was the moment, the point of no return. I felt my heart pounding in my throat, my palms wet, my body shaking, but I stayed still. For the first time in my life, I didn't obey. He took one step toward me, then another, until the shadow of him covered me completely. I could smell the faint scent of aftershave and coffee, the smell that used to mean safety when I was a child. Now, it felt like prison walls closing in. Pick it up. I looked at it, that old worn brush with years of polish dried into its bristles, and realized how many times I'd bent down for it before, how many small pieces of myself I'd given away with every "yes, Father." This time, I didn't bend. He moved closer, towering, his shadow spilling across my face. I thought he might hit me. Maybe he thought so too, but he didn't. Instead, he just stared, long enough for me to see something flicker in his eyes. Not rage, not disappointment, something deeper, something like disbelief. Maybe he saw the end of control, maybe he saw the beginning of me. He turned away without a word, walked to his study, and closed the door with the same quiet precision he used for everything. The click of that door was softer than I expected, but it felt louder than any slap. When he was gone, I sat down at the table, shaking so hard the brush rattled against the wood. I wasn't proud. I wasn't free. I was terrified. But beneath the fear, there was something new. A strange, fragile warmth. Mother came to the doorway, eyes wet, voice trembling. "What did you do?" I just said, "No." She didn't say anything. She just stared, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. And for a fleeting second, I thought I saw something in her face, not fear, not anger, but hope. That night, the house stayed silent. Father didn't come to my room. He didn't speak at dinner. It was as if the act had changed the gravity of our home. The next morning, he left early for work. He didn't say goodbye. When the door closed, I sat in the living room, watching the morning light spill across the same wooden floor where I had once walked like a ghost. I ran my fingers across the table where the brush had fallen. The fear was still there. Maybe it always would be. But now it shared space with something else. A voice. Small, but alive. Mine.
Years have passed since that morning. Decades, really. But sometimes I still hear the sound of that silence. Not the slam of his hand or the brush rolling on the floor, but the space between them. The quiet that came after. I'm 37 now. I live in a small apartment above a bookstore. The walls are thin, the floors creak, and there's always music from the cafe downstairs. It's nothing like the house I grew up in. There are no rules taped to the refrigerator, no clock set 10 minutes fast, no footsteps that freeze the air. But silence still visits me sometimes. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy one, the one I was raised to obey. It finds me when I sit at my desk late at night, writing letters I'll never send. Letters to him, to the man who taught me how to stand straight, how to work hard, how to say yes even when everything inside me screamed no. Letters I start with "Dear Father," but never finish. He's gone now. Heart attack, 2 winters ago. A small funeral, gray sky, no tears. I remember standing by the coffin, staring at the stillness of his face. I waited for something, anger, relief, grief, but what I felt was confusion, like a child waiting for instructions that never came. When people spoke about him, they used words like principled, disciplined, strong. No one mentioned how quiet he made the house feel. No one mentioned the fear that grew like vines in every corner. After the service, I went back to the house, the same one where I'd lived all those years ago. It looked smaller now, almost fragile. dust on the curtains, a faint smell of old wood. I walked through the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the floorboards that had memorized so many of my quiet walks. The study door was still there, his world, untouched. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting his voice to call out my name. Inside, everything was in its place. Books lined the shelves with military precision, the same leather chair, the same clock ticking on the wall. On the desk, there was a small box. Inside it, a few photographs of me, of Mother, of all of us pretending to smile. And there it was, the shoe brush, the same one that had rolled across the table all those years ago. Its handle worn, the wood faded from time. I picked it up and turned it in my hands, and suddenly, everything came rushing back. That day, that silence, that small moment when I finally said no. It didn't feel like victory, it never had. But now holding that brush, I realized it wasn't rebellion either. It was survival. It was the first breath of my own life trying to break through the suffocation of his expectations. I placed the brush back on the table and sat in his chair. The air felt thick, like the house was holding its breath again. I looked around the room and whispered, softly, uncertainly, "I forgive you." The words felt strange, almost foreign. Forgiveness wasn't something we ever practiced at home. But as soon as I said them, the tension inside me loosened, not gone, but lighter. He had built a world where love looked like order and order looked like control. Maybe he believed that breaking us was the only way to keep us strong. Maybe that's all he knew. I don't hate him anymore, but I still don't know how to love him either. I walked outside that day, locking the house behind me. The sky was pale, the wind quiet. I remember thinking how strange it was. The silence no longer scared me. It followed me, yes, but it didn't own me. Now, when I wake up before dawn, I sit by the window with coffee in my hand and let the quiet fill the room. I don't fight it. I listen. I listen to the sound of a life that's no longer afraid to exist in peace. Sometimes I wonder what he would think if he could see me now, my unpolished shoes, the messy desk, and the laughter that comes easily when friends visit. Maybe he'd call it chaos. Maybe he'd think I've lost my way. But I know better. I know that somewhere between the pain and the silence, I found something he never could, a gentleness that doesn't need rules to exist. And though I still hear echoes of his voice in the back of my mind, sharp, commanding, cold, I answer differently now. Not with, "Yes, Father," not with, "I'm sorry," but with something quieter, something freer. I simply say, "It's okay." Because the boy he tried to break learned something the man he became will never forget.